I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did as a teenager. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from her lived a family. One night their daughter, who was sweet and small, about 9 or 10 years old, went to bed with a bad headache. The next day, she was dead. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After her funeral, the family went away to get their minds off the tragedy. The father asked my uncle, my mom's brother, to check on their pets. My uncle was a good friend of the family and often visited them. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard there was a grand piano, and she wanted to play it. She had always wanted to play a grand piano but never had the chance, so she seized the opportunity. My dad was studying to be a veterinarian. It was a cold winter night when they arrived at the house. Snow was falling gently, covering everything in a white blanket. The house itself seemed to loom out of the darkness, silent and somber. After entering, my uncle and my father headed to the basement to see the animals. My mother went to the piano on the ground floor. She sat down and began to play, her fingers dancing over the keys. The melody echoed through the empty house, filling the air with a haunting tune. As she played, she felt something brush her ankles. She thought a cat must have left the basement and walked past her. She didn't give it much thought and kept playing. Then she felt it again. She looked under the piano but saw nothing. When she started playing again, she felt hands clasp her legs tightly. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She dashed to the basement door, calling for my uncle and father. She waited, her breath coming in short gasps. Back outside, my uncle could tell my mom was rattled and asked what was wrong. She told him what had happened, her voice trembling. He turned white as a sheet. He told her the daughter who had died used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath, grab his ankles, and push his feet up and down on the pedals. I don't believe in ghosts, but after all, no matter how a ghost story begins, it always hinges on the notion that, come on, of course we believe in ghosts. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when I came home from work one day and went into the bathroom. I saw something strange. A wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space, lay fractured in 2 pieces on the ground. I examined the pieces. The board was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I thought the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed pictures to the landlord, asking if anyone had been there, with an undertone of annoyance, since she hadn't warned me. Her reply read, "Please call me as soon as you are able to." I called, and she explained that her last 2 tenants had said the same thing happened. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up one night around 4 a.m. My body was covered in goosebumps. It felt like someone was rubbing his or her hands on me. Everything was silent, but then I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There is no way an animal could make that sound. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light, armed myself with a cricket bat, and walked to the bathroom. That's when I saw that the new board covering the hole was broken in 2. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped. But I heard something else. Whispering. The sound was clear and coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over, "It's your turn. It's your turn." I switched on every light in the apartment to make things feel normal. It was 5 a.m. and dark outside. I watched TV to try to unwind. Then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night, but he started squawking like he was being strangled. I never heard him make those sorts of noises. He was screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran out, sat in my car, and waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me enough to go back in. The front door was open, but I figured I might have forgotten to close it when I ran out. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I looked everywhere inside. When I walked to the bathroom, I heard splashing. Dexter was half drowned in the toilet. I took him out, washed him, and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 a.m., I called the landlord and gave her a watered-down version of the night. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. "I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few occasions, and twice the board covering the hole in the ceiling moved. I wasn't in a position to move at the time, so I had to endure it. Although I live elsewhere now, the landlord recently called. She said that her new tenants had begged to speak with me about some of the stuff that's been going on there. Forget it, it's their problem now." When I was 16 years old, babysitting was an additional source of income. I was lucky enough to have many families in my area that needed a babysitter. A lady I babysat for quite often asked me one day if I would mind caring for her sister's baby. She mentioned that her sister had a hard time keeping a babysitter. Well, of course, I thought it was due to the child. I didn't mind at all. I quickly accepted the job, meaning more income for myself, and she was a super nice lady. However, her husband was, well, a real jerk. He didn't want to be bothered with the baby at all, and he was always in a mood. For the most part, he was away a lot. My first day, she made a point to tell me that the house was quirky, making a lot of strange noises and whatnot. She told me to call her if I had any problems. I thought it was strange but dismissed it as just being because she was nervous to leave her baby with a new sitter. My first week was really uneventful, a few weird noises, but I just dismissed them. One distinctive thing that I remember about the house was that it was always dark. Even on the brightest day, it was always really dark. During the day, you still had to have the lights on, even with the curtains open. The baby, who was only 6 months old, had a cute rainbow nightlight. It was an older one that you manually had to use some force to click on and off. Once it lightened up some in the morning, I would go and turn off the nightlight. Well, morning came, and I turned off the nightlight. I went out to the living room to catch up on some homework, and as soon as I got settled, the baby started screaming. I rushed into his room. He was hysterical, and the nightlight was on. I know for a fact that I turned it off. It wasn't a mistake or something I thought I did. I played it in my mind over and over and over again. I know that I turned that light off. I took the baby and comforted him. I was so disoriented and scared, I didn't even try to turn it off again. I thought if something wants it on, it can be on. I didn't tell the mother about the nightlight. Every day, she would come and ask me if everything was okay. And I knew she wasn't just talking about her son. Over the next few weeks, the experiences came more and more often. Lights turning on and off. Doors closing by themselves. One afternoon, I was playing with the baby on the living room floor when I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I jumped up and ran to see what had happened. The cabinets were all open, and pots and pans were scattered across the floor. The baby started crying, and I quickly picked him up, trying to calm him down. I felt a cold breeze pass by me, even though all the windows were closed. All of the events finally came to a peak. I was in the kitchen, mixing oatmeal for the baby, when from behind, something tugged the bottom hem of my shirt, and hard. It was so hard that my shirt tightened around my neck. I turned around, and no one was there. I screamed and ran into the living room where the baby stared at me from his high chair like I was crazy. I didn't tell his mother about this either. I don't know why I didn't tell her. Maybe I was scared that she would think I was crazy, or maybe I just didn't want to bother her with it. Or maybe I was just scared since I never told anyone. Finally, she and her husband moved out of the house that fall, making their stay only 10 months. I was the only babysitter who managed to be permanent during their time. I never discussed the events that happened there. Later, I did some research on the area. It's incredibly rural, and as southern as you can get. It also has a rich history in Indian tribes. While looking up the house, I discovered that during its construction, evidence of a full Indian burial site had been discovered. It made sense in a way. The strange noises, the dark atmosphere, the inexplicable events. It all pointed to something much older and deeper than just a quirky house. And now, every time I think back to those months, I can't help but feel a chill. Last year, my friend Tasha, her real name is Natasha but she hates it when people use it, went to a friend's house for a party. Around 1 in the morning, the group decided to use a Ouija board. Tasha was the only one who believed in accounts of the paranormal, so she was hesitant when her friends brought out the board. But instead of giving her friends more reasons to tease her about her beliefs, she acted as if she didn't believe in such activity. They began asking the board questions. They started with a few normal questions, and nothing really exciting happened. Then someone asked if the spirit wanted to hurt them, and it responded with, "Only one." The group started to get creeped out at this point, and rightfully so. When one friend asked the natural follow-up question, "Who?" the board spelled out Natasha. Tasha's full name. It should be noted that she doesn't care for her full name, and has everyone call her Tasha instead. She left the room while her friends continued playing, but found out later that night that the group forgot to say goodbye to the board. Anyone familiar with a Ouija board knows that closing the interaction with the spirit is crucial before stopping use of the board. Needless to say, she was nervous. After this, Tasha has no memory of the night. She only remembers getting a migraine and nosebleeds. Her friends took videos of her acting strangely, speaking with a changed voice, and a few instances of her talking in other languages. However, that night wasn't the only time this happened. In the days following, Tasha's parents reported the same things happening. Once again, she remembered nothing but migraines and nosebleeds. About 2 weeks later, she was back to normal. Or so she thought. Tasha was suddenly hospitalized for an excruciating pain in her kidney, so bad that it almost shut down. The doctors tried everything but couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then, on the day she was scheduled for surgery, the pain suddenly stopped. 1 day later, Tasha was released. Since that incident, she has never felt like she was truly alone. Sometimes, she feels someone grabbing her hands or neck, making it difficult to breathe. Tasha has always believed in the paranormal, but this experience made it far more real for her.